One of the most common questions that I get when people find out that I do voice acting is, how in the world did you get into it? And maybe some of you don't even know about that because maybe you got into this channel through some of my more like music production videos or whatever. But the reason I'm posting a video about this on this channel is because my audio engineering and music production skills and background directly play into how I got into voice acting. So before I talk about how I actually got my first gig, I'll talk about how I even realized that voice acting or voiceover was something that, number one, I wanted to do, and number two, I thought I could do. I'll start with the fact that I think I've always secretly wanted to do some form of voice acting. Back when I was pretty young, I don't know, maybe 11, 12, 13, around that age, I would spend hours recording myself on the Windows sound recorder. It's like the most minimal, simple way of recording audio. And I'm talking, this is back in Windows 98 days, Windows XP days, that kind of stuff. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I just had a little microphone that was terrible quality, but I really enjoyed the process of recording myself, manipulating my voice, coming up with different sort of like characters and stuff. And I would do little silly, probably extremely cringy audio skits with my friends. And so I think that's the first time I kind of realized, hey, maybe I want to do this, but it never really crossed my mind that I'd ever be able to do it as a career at any point until way later in my life when certain opportunities presented themselves. If you're watching this video, it's probably because you have an interest in voice acting, and that's something maybe you want to do as a side gig just for fun, or maybe as a full-time career. The number one misconception about voice acting is that you have to have this deep, lush voice to be a voice actor. And also, that misconception goes the other way, in which that people who do have that voice automatically think that they should be in voice acting. And maybe you have that voice and you've been told multiple times, oh, you should be a voice actor. You should be a voice actor. You have a great voice. I can tell you right now that while that's a great thing to have, and it's an amazing tool to be able to use in voice acting, it's probably not as important as you think. In fact, if you have that sort of generic voice that people think of when you think of voice acting, it's kind of a problem because now you're competing against the best of the best who do have that voice and have years of experience. That was by far the biggest misconception I had. I did not like my voice. I would compare it to what I thought what a traditional voice actor was like. And I was like, I have this weird kind of higher pitched voice. I hate how I sound. I sound a little annoying, maybe. I mean, I don't think anyone generally likes how they sound when they first hear themselves recorded, but I'm happy to tell you that you don't need to have an amazing voice to get into voice acting. More on that a little bit later in the video, but let's get to the reason you got here. How did I get into voice acting? Well, the reality is that I kind of fell into it accidentally. And I don't want your takeaway to be, oh, great, so I guess I have to just be in the right place at the right time for this to ever happen to me. That's not the point. My point is actually the opposite. It's that sometimes if you are passionate about something and you see opportunities, you should take them because you never know where they might lead. So how did I get into voice acting? I went to college for audio engineering, and that's because I used to be in a band and I loved music and recording, and I realized the band wasn't going to make it. So I was like, how can I translate this into a skill that I can actually have a career with? And the most kind of like technical way that I saw was audio engineering. I was like, cool, I could still be surrounded by music and I can be in studios, and that sounds cool. So I went to school for audio engineering. I have a video actually about whether or not technical schools are worth it. Check that link in the bio. But that's neither here nor there. I learned my stuff, and I was lucky enough to land a studio gig fairly shortly after I graduated in a music post-production house that was primarily focused in the commercial world. So TV commercials, radio commercials, and all that stuff. And that's when I got exposed to this whole other side of voice acting, more commonly referred to in that world as voiceover. And it's something that had never really crossed my mind. I was under the impression that voice acting was just for cartoons and video games and that kind of stuff. And you never really considered the fact that every single commercial that has a voiceover, that's a person who's in a booth reading stuff and using their voice to, make some money. So that's when I realized, okay, there's something here. Now I'm going to be the first to tell you that I had no idea how much actually goes into voice acting. I thought it was just read the script, make a funny voice or a cool voice or whatever, sound good, and you're good. You're golden. If you got the voice, you're set. Not the case. There's so many small intricacies in terms of pacing, breathing, overall inflection, projection, tone, everything. There's a ton of experience that goes into that you just don't have when you're starting. So sometimes people ask me, did you ever take acting classes did you ever hire a voiceover coach? And the reality is I didn't. I was lucky enough to be in this environment where I essentially got to learn by just osmosis. I was seeing a bunch of really, really talented voiceovers and voice actors coming into the studio and doing their thing. And as I started gaining more and more experience, I actually started learning how to direct talent and started, running my own sessions, being the voiceover director. After a couple hundred sessions, eventually you start picking up on some patterns. You start learning certain things about how voice actors do things. You start learning the ins and outs, the lingos and whatnot. And so at this point, I had a huge interest in voice acting. But if I'm being honest, I wasn't practicing it at home. I didn't ever consider the fact that I could be a voice actor. Again, because I never felt like I had the voice for it. That being said, as I was learning a little bit more, I started realizing, hey, some of these voice actors don't have these like amazing voices that when I'm talking to them, just in casual conversation, I'm like, oh my God, they should be voice actors. So there was definitely thoughts creeping into my mind about like, oh, maybe that's something I could do. Okay, so now you're like, all right, whatever, get through it. How did you get your first gig? Stop beating around the bush. The reason I'm beating around the bush is because it was a complete fluke. So this was back in 2012, and I was working as the audio engineer / audio mixer for a KFC commercial. And something that happens very commonly in the ad industry world, in studios and post-production, all that stuff, is that the client or director will sometimes ask for what's called a scratch take, meaning they just want you to record a voiceover with your own voice. Usually the audio engineer just records a quick scratch take purely for timing purposes. So you read the script, usually with very little emotion, and you read it at a normal pace to get an idea of where the voiceover is going to fit inside that 30-second commercial. Well, in this particular case, I had done many scratch takes before, but in this particular case, I had decided, what if I just give this a shot? What if I did it as if I was the voice actor on this, just to see how it sounds? Just use it as a form of experience and practice. And I did this on my own time. I was just recording myself. So I gave it a shot and, I was like, okay, that sounds decent. And we sent it off. It's important to note that Scratch VO exists because voice actors are expensive. You're paying them by the session hours, and then you have to pay them for the actual usage of their voice on a commercial. So generally, when the script for the commercial is still being worked out, they'll only do scratch takes. They won't use a real voice actor because that would be a waste of money. So when I sent over my scratch voiceover to the director, it was shortly after that I got a call that was a somewhat unhappy call saying, why did you guys hire a voice actor already? This is supposed to just be a scratch take. The script isn't final. We don't have that kind of budget. And I quickly interjected and I was like, no, it's fine. It's fine. We didn't waste any money. It's just, that's my voice. It's fine. Like, I'm not charging anything for this. And it was just like a bit of a pause, like a little silence. And then he was like, what? Impressed. He loved the voice. I mean, I couldn't really believe it was happening. It was kind of wild to think about that. I had done a scratch voiceover take and they had liked my voice. I had been lucky enough to hit the tone that the director liked in the first place. And to make a long story short, I ended up re-recording later on and I stayed on that commercial and I got paid for it. And it was a super trippy, weird thing that sent my head off for a spiral because I was like, okay, well, maybe I can do this. And so after that, I just started booking everything in the land and I became a super successful, wealthy voice actor. That's a lie. That's a fabrication because that's the opposite of what happened. What happened was that I didn't land another gig for a long time, but I did have this new kind of spark and I started practicing a lot and I started figuring out how I could build a voiceover reel and whatnot. And this is the key that I think made the biggest difference is that I allowed myself to believe that I could do voice acting. And so I presented myself as that to potential clients and friends. I started being more confident in the fact that this is something I could do. And I was committed for it to not be a one-off. And so now when people would ask me, what do you do? I'd be like, okay, I do a little bit of audio engineering, some music production, and I do some voice acting. And even though I had only landed one gig, one legitimate gig, it helped a lot because I think something does change in your sort of perspective in your mind when you tell yourself that you are a certain thing. I think you start seeking more opportunities, you start getting more serious about your practice and your plan to do that. That's number one. If you want to get into voice acting, tell yourself that you're a voice actor. Don't just settle for, I have a cool voice and I hope that one day I could do that. Really take it seriously. Take it like a craft. Really learn as much as you can and start practicing a ton. Eventually, more opportunities did start coming up, and I was lucky enough to start landing those. And I can tell you right now, I wish somebody would have told me this, you will feel like a fraud for years. For years, even if you're booking stuff consistently. I had the craziest amount of imposter syndrome, specifically with voice acting. Because again, remember, I didn't like my voice. So imagine being a voice actor that doesn't like his voice and how that looks or sounds. It's tough, but I had a passion for it and I kept going. And now I've been doing it loosely for over a decade since I started back in 2012. And for most of those years, it was a side gig, something that I would do whenever I had the opportunity to and when I had free time. But these days, I'm lucky enough to be in a position to where I can do it almost as a full-time gig. And look, your takeaway from this video should not be, oh, great, I guess I need to learn audio engineering and I need to go work at a studio and hope that I'm lucky enough that I get selected to do this scratch take and then do it such a good job that the director loves me. And that's not the point. The point is that I had this passion from when I was like a little kid, and I denied myself of that because of dumb factors like, I don't like my voice, or I'm not legit enough for this, or blah, 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 blah. You should be passionate about the things you're passionate about. And that means it doesn't matter if you're not great right now. It doesn't matter if you don't have the best voice. What matters is that it's something that you truly love, and you should seek those opportunities wherever you can. I would say that the single biggest factor that allowed me to get into voice acting was not the fact that I worked at a studio and knew how to engineer and record myself. I mean, those things helped tremendously, don't get me wrong. But the biggest difference was that I allowed myself to believe that I could do that on whatever scale, whether that was a small scale or a full-time scale. That's what made the biggest difference. Because let's be real, if the reality was that anyone who has a studio and gets to work in the commercial world can become a voice actor and that's how you get into it. If that was the case, every single audio engineer that works in that field would be a voice actor. And that's just not the case. Like, I've met a few other voice actors that started that way, but for the most part, it's because they had a passion for it. And that's kind of like secretly what they always wanted to do. So yes, if you have the capacity for it and you have the interest for it, you should learn a little bit of audio engineering, which is why you can watch this channel and learn a lot about sound and audio and all that stuff, and you can subscribe. But aside from that, if you have a passion for it, don't beat around the bush. Start practicing, start doing research, take it seriously, and believe in yourself, because it may take years. It took me a long time. I listened to what I sounded like back in 2012, and it's like, I don't even know how I got hired because it's not good. But the passion is what took me through that and got me to the point where I could do it alongside other things. It doesn't have to be your full-time job either. There's different levels of success. Thanks for watching. I can do more videos like this if you have more interest in the voice acting world. And if you have any questions, just drop them below in the comments and I will answer them. I got time. And stick around the channel because I am enjoying making these videos. And even though it's a very small audience that I have, I enjoy the few people that do interact with me and ask me questions, because it's nice to know that I'm having even the smallest, tiniest baby impact on people's lives. So thanks for watching. I really do mean that. Thanks for watching. It's not just about views and stuff like that. It's that connection that sometimes you get to make with people that are on the other side of the world. So that's really cool. And yeah, thanks. Take it easy.